Oh, and we have a little one joining us for our conversation. What a beauty. Being part of. So, Sharon Raji Maynard here with a podcast community, the Patreon community of A Mystic's View. And I'm so excited to have you with us, Jacqueline. We have Jacqueline Freeman, and she does a lot of things, especially with bees, and that's what we're going to be talking about. And as you can see, she's written a book called Song of Increase, and you'll know a little bit more about that. Look at all those tabs in there. I love that. So welcome, Jacqueline. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thank you for being with us this morning. So tell us a little bit about yourself before bees. What was going on with you?
Oh, let me see. Before bees, I've been with bees for about 15, probably 16 years now. And before that, actually just before, originally I was from the East Coast. I lived in Massachusetts. I lived on Martha's Vineyard for 20 years before it was rich and famous. And then from there, I moved out here in the late 80s. I think 89, I got here. And a few years later, my husband and I bought a farm. And we were just learning how to, take care of our land. I was from a small town. I lived on an island. I wasn't a city girl at all. We briefly lived in Seattle, and I remember one day someone said to me, there's somebody new who's moved across the street. And so I was so excited, and I made a pie, and I went over and I knocked on the door and I said, welcome to the neighborhood. If you ever need anything, we live in that white house with the green trim across the street, diagonal to you, and come over anytime. And the guy looked at me through the screen door, and he opened the screen door and he went, okay. And he took the pie and he shut the door, and I went back across the street and I said to my husband, we are so not city people. You're supposed to invite me in and we get to know each other and we have a piece of pie, and then I go home and then you have more pie, and then when the pie pan is empty, you come back across the street and you return to me and I invite you in to have cookies, and we start a relationship. And I realized I was really a small town girl.
So when you say, where did you live?
About 2,000 people now, and I'm perfectly happy.
And that's located down close to the Portland.
On the Washington side of Portland, yes.
Washington side of Portland. Wow. And you love it there.
Yeah, we did not start out to be farmers. We bought a farm because I wanted to live in the country, and we're actually the second owners of a 100-year-old farm. And it was funny because the first time that I was meeting some of my neighbors, I was getting to know my neighbors around me a little bit. And the first year, my friend Brenda, who lives diagonal down the hill from me, she raises heirloom chickens. And she came over one day and she pulled in the driveway and she said, you have a farm. You really ought to have chickens. And I said, that's a good idea. We probably should have chickens. And she said, great, I've got some in my back seat. And she pulled out half a dozen chickens and let them go and gave them to me. And that was how that started. In the second year, a friend of mine said, I have a friend who's got some bees. The neighbor just moved, didn't want to take the bees. They've been in the forest for 6 years, and the new owner doesn't want to have bees. And she said, but you have a farm, you should have bees. And that's how it always happens. You have a farm, you should have cows, you should have goats, you should have, so one animal at a time. We built a farm. And I was not a farmer. I was just a small town girl. I grew up in a town that had farms. My best friend lived on a farm. I had ponies, and but it was just country more than farm. So we ended up taking those errant bees in. That was my first hive, and then someone else called me and said there's some bees that need to be moved, and I learned how to do that and move them, and then I got some more bees, and then I collected some swarms, and I was just off and running.
Oh my word. And all of those things that you're speaking to, most people have no idea what you're talking about. But I think I could understand that there was a hive that needed to be moved from a property that had just been purchased. So you moved it to your property, correct? Because you had a farm, right? And farms need bees.
Did we know how to do it? No, I did not know how to do it. Nor did my husband, nor did my friends. We just sort of figured it out. And back then, actually, the YouTube, this is, almost 20 years ago, YouTube wasn't in vogue yet. So there weren't as many places where you could go and just say, collect a swarm and enter it and pull up a video on a how-to.
That's right.
And I was in the vanguard movement of honeybees. They were not a popular fad at that point. Short years later, probably 8 years later, everybody and their brother wanted to get bees, and everyone was on a save the bees thing. And I was like, oh, you got to learn a lot about bees before you can save them.
That's right. Right.
The intention is there, but the knowledge is not.
Yeah, the excitement to interact with bees, or somehow like save the bees and interact with the bees on some level is a wish. But when you put it into action, like, how do you move a swarm? Why is there even a swarm?
There's good ways to do it, and there's bad ways to do it. And, some of them really are harmful to the bees. So I know a lot of people think they want to, I get this all the time. I want to help save the bees, so I'm going to become a beekeeper. And it's like, there's a steep learning curve on it. And frankly, these days, I don't even encourage people to go in that direction anymore. I say, first thing you can do to help the bees is don't use chemicals and become a gardener. You'll do so much for the bees by doing that. Bees are everywhere. You don't have to have them in your backyard, and do that for a while. A lot of people get bees and they put them in their backyard and they rely on the neighborhood to supply all the flora for them. But I think it should be the reverse. I think we should be planting as much as we possibly can and then inviting bees, maybe, or even just letting them be on their own.
Right, right. So, and of course, nowadays, all you have to do is go to Google and say, what is the best flower for bees?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're going to find what they need, because they're committed to living and doing what they do.
Yeah. And you can even go online to like the Xerxes Foundation, xerces.org, is a pollinator nonprofit. And you can buy a bag of flower seeds for your region, just from them. I mean, that's pretty cool. That's pretty amazing.
That is very cool. That is very cool. So spell their name again.
xerces.org. They're a wonderful nonprofit that teaches people how to really truly help pollinators, and that includes butterflies and bees and everybody who's in that family. Mm-hmm. And they do a great job. Yeah. Great job. I one of my favorite.
Yeah, that's really a good idea, because how many of us can plant flower seeds? Hello, we're planting trees. Why not flower seeds, right? Start this movement of planting flower seeds in order to enrich our bee community and our bee families.
Much better sequence of activity.
Yeah. Steep learning curve. I think that's important to think about. What was it that you had to learn about the bees, other than getting them on your land because you have a farm?
So glad you asked. First started with bees. Of course, I knew nothing. And there I had bees in my field, and I went and took a bee class. I went to a conventional bee class that was, I think it was a 2-day class in Oregon. And I realized as I was watching how you keep bees conventionally, spraying with chemicals to keep parasites down, taking the honey and feeding them sugar, pinching the queen, like the queen's personality, or you thought she was getting too far along in her scant brief life. There were so many things, and every time we did a new activity, I remember thinking, well, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to kill a queen. Why would I do that? And they have reasons for doing it, but I thought, those reasons don't sound, the bees don't do that, and taking the honey and replacing it with sugar. okay, take some honey, that's fine, but so much that you have to replace it with sugar is, I mean, I didn't have to be a genius to figure out that sugar and honey are not the same thing, especially to the constitution of the bee. So anyway, that was my immediate beginning was, wow, I just went and spent a few days learning all these techniques that I am pretty much never going to do. I was hard pressed to think of anything I learned that weekend that felt right to me. And I had no knowledge about it. Really, it was a feeling of rightness.
Mhm.
It was like, that doesn't seem respectful. That doesn't seem like it's in alignment with the principles of nature. Why would I be determining this rather than letting the bees determine it? Why am I moving their combs around and why don't they know how to build them in the order that they need them built in? It was just, it was a distressing time to me. And I remember going down and sitting next to my hive. And of course I had the whole bee suit, the hat, the gloves, the pants tucked into the high boots with duct tape around them because I knew nothing. And I just had this false idea that the bees were going to come out and sting. It's like in cartoons, you see bees shown that way. And it's like, they're not like that. And I realized sitting there next to the bees, two things. The first one was that the bees could have cared less that I was sitting there next to them. They had no interest in me other than a casual one would land on my arm sometimes if it was on the way to where they were going. And the other thing was that I had this intense feeling for them. And I remember saying to them, saying out loud, I don't know the right thing to do to help you, but I am sincere in wanting to know this. I really want to know how to help you. So you're just going to have to tell me. And
Mhm.
I tried to learn from the beginning, just with my guideline, which was simply, is this respectful for the bees? Is this the way from a bee's point of view that the bee would like it to go? And I often found the answer to that to be no.
Mhm.
So I was kind of, how are we going to figure this out? And the internet was too young. There were no books. I wasn't finding anything that was other than how to raise bees conventionally, which is the same as factory farming. It's even if you have just a few bees and it's a hobby, the techniques are still the same. And that just didn't seem right to me. So that was what started me on my mission of, I need to learn how to take care of them in a way that's respectful and honoring and healthy, and always has that question first, is this good for the bees? Not good for, does it make it easier for me as a human, but is it good for bees? So that became our partnership.
I like that. It's like how many times, places in our lives are we really ever taught to say, what do you need? I want to help you.
Yes.
And what do you need?
Right. Instead of making that big assumption that I know better than you know about your own life.
Yeah, it's pretty much built into cultures around the world that somebody else comes and sits with the quote unquote bee person and say, oh, I see you need XYZ, and and we become then the one who knows all.
There's things like let me give you an example. It's common knowledge that you can't have two queens in a hive. And if one queen, so bees will, for example, replace, they know when the queen is starting to fail. In conventional beekeeping, they replace the queen every year.
Wow.
And she actually in nature can live and be fertile for 5, 6, even 7 years. So there's a big discrepancy there. But when you, so the bees know that if she's failing, her pheromones that tell about her fertility will start to decrease, and they're hip to that. So there'll be a new queen made. They'll often lay just one egg in the center, sometimes just before fall, and they'll replace the queen. A new one will hatch out. So commonly what you'll hear is, oh yeah, the new queen will hatch out, she'll go and she'll sting the old queen to death, and then you have one queen in the hive again. Well, the first time I ever opened up a hive and saw a queen sitting on the top of the top deck, kind of by herself. And I could tell she was an old queen because they're furry bodied, and she had laid so many hundreds of thousands of eggs that she'd worn all the fur off of her abdomen. She was almost shiny on her hind end. And I remember taking the lid off and looking, going, well, what are you doing here? You're the queen. And she scooted down between the bars. And I was just kind of dumbfounded. You never see a queen by herself. She always has her attendants with her because all her mission is to lay eggs, lay eggs, lay eggs. So they feed her, they groom her, they do everything to keep her doing that. And she came back up again and she looked around and then she flew off. And she probably didn't live more than a day, but she had this little flight by herself off there. And that was the first time I saw a queen. And of course, there was an active queen in there too. And what I've seen since then, a few times in my own hives, is two queens, a young queen and an old queen. And what happens is, here's this queen. She's served this hive for years. The new queen hatches out. They don't look at her and go, oh, off with your head, to the old queen. Instead, she just gets kind of shuttled aside and they treat her like another bee. In other words, they feed her, they help take care of her, they'll groom her if she needs it. She goes into retirement. So the first time I brought this up, people were like, no, that can't happen. That's one of the principles, only one queen to a hive. I've seen it in my own hives 3 times now. And my friends who now keep bees too have repeated the same kind of stories. They open it up and there's one queen, and look at this over here, there's the retired queen. Wow. So in the monarchy, when they go into the retirement, they actually is a word for it. It's a British.
Interesting. I don't know it either because I'm not English, but she goes into retirement.
And she's
and she's still respected.
She'll just live out her days. It's probably just maybe a few weeks, and she has no longer a driving purpose in the hive, and she'll just live until she dies. Mm-hmm. Now she will be living 2 more years. They do this when she's toward the end of her life anyway. Mm-hmm. But how sweet and wonderful and natural, when I think of it, that seems so much more appropriate in activity than off with her head.
Exactly. So, or replacing her every year just because you think you need to replace her every year. Who made that up?
Well, I can tell you who made that up. In that class that I took, that was one of the things we did. We had, they gave everybody, first they paired everybody up. So I was paired with a guy. We're all wearing our big white hazmat bee suits. And so I don't even hardly know what he looked like, but we were paired up and they said, okay, everybody find hive, open up the top. Now you're going to find the queen in here. And the queen she's 1.5 the size of everybody else. So she's bigger, but she's also marked with a colored dot, which, okay, it makes her easier to find, but she has to wear a big bright colored dot. And I think of are there toxic stuff inside the markers? They mark the queens with her. Just the way my little brain goes, trying to think of the fullness of the experience. Anyway, we find the old queen, and so he picks her up, and I've got this new queen in this little tiny wooden box, and I'm just fascinated. I don't think I've seen a bee close up, never mind a queen close up. And they say, okay, one of you pick the old queen up, and so he picks her up, and I'm still looking at the new queen here. And the guy says, squish the queen now. So squishes the queen. And I was like, what? Squish the queen? I had no idea we were going to be killing bees here. I was distraught. I was just, why are we killing the queen? She looked perfectly good. 30 seconds ago, she was laying eggs and the guy said, I said, why are we killing queens? This doesn't make any sense to me. And he says, because they lose their fertility in their 2nd year. So we replace them every spring. Every next spring, we replace them with a new queen, and that way we've always got peak fertility. And I thought, that isn't the way nature does it. Now, I don't know what the right way is, but I'm pretty sure that's not the right way. And years later, when I started having deep communications with bees, I had never killed a queen in my hives. I let them sort it out and do it the way that they wanted to do it. And I'd seen queens live and go on with their fertility for years. So I knew that it was quite possible. And I wondered, why do they say that the fertility it decreases so much? And then, and I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit, because let me just state it. I can communicate with bees. I can speak with them. They speak with me. And it wasn't a thing that I learned how to do. It was like one day that just opened up. It was as much a surprise to me as anything. It was probably in about my 6th year. I'm going to come back to the queens.
Okay.
In my 6th year, I had 1,000 questions, and I was always going down and sitting next to my bees. And by now I wasn't wearing my bee suit anymore. I realized they were friendly. I was friendly. And I would just sit next to the front of that hive, and I would say, I don't know what to do, but I want to do right by you. And just lead me in any direction. I will follow what you say. Now, for 6 years, I had never gotten an answer about anything. It didn't matter. I still showed up, and in my earnestness, that was my request, was share with me, tell me how to best help you be the fullness of what you can possibly be. And it was just like a prayer, I said.
Yeah.
And one morning I woke up, I was in that half asleep, half awake place where things can come in. And I just heard this little voice talking in my head, telling me something about the bees. And I had a pad of paper down next to the bed, and I wrote it down. I had a journal, sometimes in the morning I'd wake up and I'd write something, but this was not from me. This was something coming through me about the bees. And I wrote it all down. I woke my husband up and said, I just got this really interesting, strange information. And that was interesting. And then, a few mornings later, it happened again and happened again. And then we were off and running. It was a lot of information about bees. It was like this portal opened up where I was hearing and seeing information coming from, not from one of my hives, more like the bees, how would you even say it? Like the entire bee family. It was like there was a spokesman bee. It wasn't like one bee. It was like the family of the bee.
Like the bee collective, the bigger psychic collective.
Yeah, like that. And so I got a lot of new information. And the information I got was like, I would read it and go, yes, that's my intuition has always been, there's got to be a different way than this. And I had refused to do any of those things that I was learning. I was winging it for sure. But my bees were doing okay. Not all of them survived, but I was learning as I was going. Anyway, my husband, my saintly husband, he started saying, if you want to just like start talking in the morning, just wake me up, I'll grab the pen and I'll start writing. So he became my scribe a lot of morning, which was really nice, because then I could really stay immersed in it and following where my pen was on the page. And he would often say, that's just got the ring of truth to it. So, for example, we can go back to that idea about the queens. So I said to them one time, what's the deal about the queens, and why is the belief in conventional beekeeping that queens lose their fertility after a year? That just doesn't seem right. As often happened, I would put a question out there, and sometimes they would give me an immediate answer, but more often they would be giving me an answer, but I didn't understand how the answer was relevant yet.
Okay.
So interesting. So anyway, they had been explaining to me how when bees swarm, and this is so interesting, I'm fascinated by swarming. Swarming is how a bee colony says everything is right in our world. Everything is full and rich, and we have an abundance of honey and nectar, nectar that's becoming honey, and pollen for the babies, and a bunch of babies in the nursery that are gestating, and the flowers are in bloom, and everything is wonderful. We're big enough at this point that we could split and become two hives. So the magnificence of the swarm is just these bees. One day, there's a long preparation. The preparation takes almost 2 months. And then one day, half the hive just exits with the old queen. And the old queen has laid a bunch of baby eggs, baby queen eggs in there. And about 2 weeks, a week to 2 weeks after the swarm leaves, these new eggs will hatch. And one of those will become the queen of the hive that's left behind, the colony that's left behind. In the meantime, here's this queen that departs with all these bees. And I'm talking like 20, 30,000 bees. This is so amazing. Now, make sure I come back and tell you about the queen if I go off on a tangent here. But I have to tell you about swarming because it's so amazing. I've been standing there going, my bees, they're about ready to swarm. And all of a sudden, there's like a signal given, and they just pour like water out of the hive, just as fast as many as can come. And when they come out, there's just this chaos of 20, 30, 50, a lot, thousands of bees, tens of thousands of bees. And it will be about, all these bees are in the air. Now the last one out, it takes them like 10 minutes to get all the bees out. And they're just flying like this. They never bump into each other. It's amazing. I've stood in the middle of the swarm and I've never been bumped with that many bees in the air. So look, I'm in a room that's probably 15 feet by 15 feet. Add 20,000 bees who are going like this in every direction at once, and nobody bumps into each other. I mean, that to me says there's some kind of cosmic consciousness that says, I am part of you and you are part of me, and we know where we all are at the same time. We can be, and they don't even bump into each other. Anyway, they all fly around in this, what looks to us to be chaos. The intention is to hide the queen, and she's one of the last bees out. She's big, and if you had a bird flying overhead going, oh, I want that big fat one, they can't risk that she would be picked off or lost along the way. So she comes out and she flies around with them for a while, and then they head over and they find usually like a branch, and they just all land in like kind of a big football shaped ball, and they land and wait on that branch. And what they're doing is they're seeing if the queen is there, and she'll land early on with them, and then they just form layers and layers and layers, all hanging on to each other, suspended. It's just magical. And then the whole tempo changes. All of a sudden, instead of it being this jubilant, happy, exuberant energy, I mean, you can't help but laugh till I'll cry, because it's just so incredible to be in that energy. And then all of a sudden, it all coalesces onto this hanging bunch of bees, all walking around on the surface, and they're just humming and just happy to be there. And at that point, what they're doing is they've sent out scouts to find a new home, and there's a voting going on about where will the new home be, and they'll wait. And they could wait 20 minutes, they could wait 3 days. It's until they're ready. Sometimes the 20-minute wait is the scouts have already picked out a place and decided. They just stop off on a tree branch, make sure the queen's there. If the queen isn't there, they'll all go back in the hive, which I've seen happen once or twice. But they'll wait. And then the queen never, ever, ever comes out of the hive except to do this swarm route where she goes off and they go move into a new home and start a new colony. So to come back to the queen, when I asked about this, they said, this is like this swarming activity. This is something that conventional beekeepers thwart. They try to have bees not swarm, because your hive may have 40,000 bees in it. All of a sudden now you lost half your workforce. You got 20,000 bees in it. So they'll do their best to prevent it. And that can be things like clipping the queen's wings. She can't fly. If she can't fly, that swarm will go out and go, the queen's not with us. Okay, we give up. We'll go back in. And they become workforce again. There's a lot of, they keep adding boxes and boxes and boxes, empty boxes, and the bees will go, whoa, we thought we were like doing well, but geez, now we got a whole empty box. I guess we can't leave and swarm. We'll have to build more, work harder. There's all these different ideas about it. Anyway, what the bees told me was, they said this swarming is really crucial to the development of the new colony. For one thing, there's this jubilation. You can feel they're bonded. There's just this happiness and everything. And they fly off and create a new colony. But the queen, if she's prevented from swarming, she doesn't ever get to come out. So she'll stay in that hive and she'll lay her eggs and she can't leave. She may have clipped wings. She may, for one or another, a bunch of reasons, she'll choose not to leave because conventional beekeepers are thwarting the process of swarming.
Wow.
That's it in a nutshell.
Right.
But what they said was, of course she's infertile the second year. That swarming process is when the queen comes out and has that one brief day in the sun. And when she's in the sun, her hormones are turned on again. You don't know a thing about bees and you hear that and don't you go, oh.
Yeah. Wow. Yes.
So when you thwart swarming like a conventional beekeeper would do, of course you have an infertile queen the next year. She didn't get to have her day in the sun. And there's that whole thing. It's not just the sunlight, it's also the activity. The part of like, she takes a break from laying eggs. They kind of slim her down a little bit because she's heavy with egg, and get her ready for her flight. And the whole process of like breaking the laying cycle, that's a part of it too. So there's a whole sequence of activities that go on that the bees understand and do, and for the health of the hive.
Wow.
So in the way there, and we go, well, I want to keep all my bees. We need to make more honey. Get back in here. That just isn't for the good of the bees. So, oh my goodness, I think I talked 15 minutes straight there.
Yeah. There's so many correlations in life. How many places where human beings keep each other trapped, yes, and instead of how many days in the sun do we really allow ourselves? What happens to human beings because they're not allowed to follow that inner guidance, whatever it is, and also just to be in the sun, soaking in what the sun has for us.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's rest and that rejuvenation and that whole, you wake up again after your rest.
Yeah. Yeah. So so you've been talking with bees and they with you for what, 10 plus years?
10 years now. Yeah, it is still a kind of a surprise to me too. We've developed this fondness. I think if I could talk about that for a minute, that's not really a bee topic, but I have an idea about this because it's happened to me. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about how come I got chosen to be the speaker for the bees. And I don't think I'm the only one. I think there's other people who can do it too. I think there's a number of things that were in place. First of all, I had an intense and earnest, honest desire to help them. And that went for years. And I committed myself over and over and over again to doing that. I paid attention to even the smallest cues I could get. I'd go, oh, that's interesting. And rather than just taking action, I'd go, maybe I'll think about that for a while before I do something. What could that possibly be? So I was trying to develop this communication. I didn't know it would be like it is, though.
Yeah.
And I think what happens is the greater consciousness has all of this information floating around, and it's like the muse. The muse comes and picks you and says, are you available?
Mhm.
And um, uh, Elizabeth, oh, what is her name? She's a writer. Is it Eat, Pray, Love that she wrote? Oh, do you remember her name?
I don't remember her name. I know the title, but I don't remember her name.
Anyway, this is wonderful writer. Oh, I should have this name on the tip of my tongue. And she's investigated this herself. Her novels come to her pretty much fully formed, sprung from the head of Zeus.
Yeah.
And she investigated this idea too of like, how does that happen to someone? And it happens to a lot of people, whether it's scientific researchers who, suddenly see the model of the helix of the DNA and then go back into their research and go, oh yeah, it's like that. It came to me in a dream. Writers and songwriters and musicians, get a little thread of something that seems to come to them. And I find that fascinating because I think what happens with this is you kind of get this idea. I think probably a lot of people get ideas, hey, what if I invented this thing that could do this? The idea pops in out of nowhere. And I think that muse is going, are they going to do anything with it? This is a good idea. I've kind of always been open to this. And I remember my sister lived in LA and she would say, remember that thing you told me about 2 years ago, this idea you had about something that I didn't do? She said, I just saw it in a store. Someone went and invented it 2 years after you had it. So I think the idea visited me, but it wasn't a good vehicle for it. I didn't do anything with it. I knew it was a good idea. And I think they're kind of checking on, you get one good idea, and if you don't go anywhere, you don't get two good ideas or three or four. But if you get them and you respond to them and you're a good caretaker of the idea and you bring it out into the world, you do what's being asked of you, then I think you get a second, third, and a 10,000th chance it gets to repeat. So my understanding of this is that I have served the bees. So I went and, put it together and wrote my book.
Yeah.
And I'm working on a second book right now. And when I did that, wow, it took it out into the world. And so I had a number of years worth of things put aside. And then I got to see it did something. The book really spoke to certain people in a powerful way. And I'm not the only one that changed beekeeping, but I've had my hand in on it. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of people that have been changing and are changing it right now. And I look and go, God, that's great. This is, and it's a funny thing because I love this book, but I don't feel an ownership of it.
Mhm.
My stories about bees are in there, but the information about the bees came from the bees. It came through me. It didn't get invented by me. And I find that I had a hard time understanding some of it myself. I really had to go to Google, look up words and see what they're telling me. I had to become smarter in order to understand the information myself.
Mhm.
When you become a vehicle for that information to come through you and you serve the information well, you get it out into the world, I think it just keeps the door open. So the muse keeps going, yeah, that's a good vehicle. We'll send you more. I think songwriters are like that.
Yeah.
You do a good job, you put it out there, your poetry comes that way, your novels come that way. Not to everybody. I think some people do it the black and white way. You write a structure, fill it in, write up the
Right.
sentence. I think some people do it that way, but other people, and I've heard some people, I remember hearing about a woman who was a poet, and she had a poem start to come through, but she was out in the middle of the field and she didn't have a pen and a paper. And she ran back to the house, like chasing the
Oh,
lines of the poem to get them down. And she said it was almost like I was reeling them in backwards, running to the
yeah.
house to get, because it was,
Holding on to them. Don't holding on. Don't let go of them. I love that.
and
Yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've woken up in the morning and had a piece of information and gone, oh, well, that's so significant. I will certainly
I'll
remember that. Go back to sleep. Have you done that?
that my life is, you're speaking.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I go, I had an idea. What was that?
And it was so valuable. I mean, it was so profound, right? Yeah. I find it's that those 6 years of you being there, to me, it's significant because I see it as a vetting. You were being vetted by the bees, which is so missing in our world today. One of the big problems, for example, in domestic abuse situations, and I've done some conversations and interviews with those who are in that field, and it's been shown, as they've done research, that women who get into domestic violence situations don't vet. The man comes on a white horse, he brings her chocolates, he does the rose, he says the right words. She's hooked. She gives her loyalty too soon. And then it's hard to disconnect. Yeah. And so when I hear that I think the bees were vetting you. They wanted to see who you were. And, because these creatures are highly intelligent. I would think you would say that too.
Yes. I agree completely with what you're saying. And I do feel like I was entrusted with information and then given the mission of, now you go get it out there because we can't write with pens.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So in what ways?
Elizabeth Gilmore. Excuse me, Elizabeth Gilmore.
Yeah,
thank you.
Gilmore. That's right. That's right. So in what ways have your interactions with the bees changed your world beyond beekeeping?
Oneness. That is the concept that I have learned from the bees. Frankly, been through my entire life. I'm 69 now, and I've been through my entire life pretty much thinking that, there was me and then there was everybody else. And, of course I have enjoyed the company of people and all, but I didn't understand the feeling of oneness with others. How could there be anybody, I could feel what's inside of me, but I didn't feel as connected to everyone else around me. That's the one thing they described to me. One of the first lessons I got from them was about unity. And the concept of unity is that we are all one. And there's a really interesting thing that the bees do, which I'm constantly fascinated with. And I'm going to tell you how they build wax. And this is a great description of it. So you have a bar. Here's your wooden bar. In conventional hives, they have a wax sheet, and the bees have no choice on how they want to build their comb. In kind of alternative beekeeping, we just give them bars on the top so that they can suspend their combs and build them in whatever shape and size and however they want. So it's just something they can tack it onto. When they have an empty bar, all these bees will come in and they'll line up in whatever curve they're going to do it in. And one bee will hold the leg of the bees above them, and then their legs are down and the bees are holding up. And what they're doing is, it looks like this beautiful bee necklace. And they're measuring how many little hexagons across, how many hexagons down, and what will be the final shape. And they end up being like, if you took a necklace and you put a push pin here and a push pin here on that bar, the way that it falls will be the shape of it. And if it's close together, it will be a narrow, long one. If it's wider apart, it will be a short, broader one. Anyway, they're measuring. And then the bees who make wax will be making wax, and they'll come in, and the worker, they'll start working the wax into the comb. But what I find so fascinating is the bees who made the measurement are not the bees who go in and build it. So these measurements are made, and those measurements must be part of a conscious knowledge that they all have, because the next one in goes, oh, my piece goes there. I mean, I think that's astounding that, and there's so many times, there's so many examples of that where they have a common consciousness. When I described earlier the swarming and 10, 20,000 bees in the air, and they're all going about this fast and nobody bumps into each other. That again comes back to the consciousness of oneness that we share, that we are all one. that's the thing I think of everything I've learned about them is that feeling that I too am part of the one.
Hmm.
Still have independent activity. A bee can put her little patch of wax on that piece of the comb individually, but I'm part of the process of the whole.
Mhm.
I spent a lot of time thinking about that.
Mhm.
Frankly, it makes me feel really good about being of one rather than off on my own alone.
You know, when you talk about, here's the measurers, and they measure, and then that's their job, but the measurements somehow are then part of the consciousness, because the measurements are done, and they don't, and then they move aside, and then what looks to be like independent activity of, here's where I put my wax piece, it isn't an independent activity at all, is it?
It's a,
It comes from that inner larger oneness that says, who's going to put the back, but okay, I want to put the piece here. And so all of the things come together, but they come together not because that one says, I like that spot, I'm going to use it.
Mhm.
Like an awareness. Isn't it exactly what you were talking about when you're talking about those ideas that float through the consciousness that is humanity, that somebody picks that up and says, I want to that's the bee talking. I want to talk to the bee. Or like Tesla, all of his ideas came from dreams.
all of them,
All
yes.
of them.
He was pretty
So,
open.
yeah, and so and isn't it sad, and yet and yet not surprising that in our modern world, that inner guidance is what's been made fun of, diminished, and squashed, that it's coming back, but it should have been there all along.
Well, yeah.
But that we've got to relearn how to dance
Yeah. And
from that oneness.
how to serve that oneness too, that serving the whole. I think one of the vehicles that they use, that so much of my learning about this has been through the bees. I
Mhm.
remember one time I opened up a hive to do something. Now, you don't ever have to open a hive. And frankly, I haven't opened a hive in years now. I don't believe in it, and that isn't the way I treat them anymore. But at the time, I was still going in to have a look-see and have a little peek at what they were doing. And it was a really hot day the day before. And I thought if I was going to do this, I should do it early in the morning when it was cooler. Well, inside the hive, it was still really hot. And what happened was I went to move something and the comb broke off. It was too hot in the heat and it just broke. It dropped down to the bottom, just like they're all parallel combs. And this one bloop, dropped down like that. And I went, oh God, I made a mess. I made a mess. They were doing something completely different. And every bee that was in that area turned around. And I remember just watching, they all went, oh, and then they went and cleaned it up. And, I closed it up again and it felt terrible because I just thwarted their activity and I just made them have another choice. And I felt, but I kept thinking of the way that every bee was doing something and just turned and looked and went, new task. And there was no, oh, that stupid person, there was no blaming, there was no guilt, there was no what any of that I was doing myself. Oh, what an awful person. Yes, that was stupid. I did that. And I berated myself. No one had to do it for me. But I remember just that image of how they just all stopped all the different activities and went to clean up the honey spill, the mess that I just made. And it was so interesting too, because when I came back months later, what I had done was before I closed the hive up, I was like, oh man, I made a mess and I've got a comb sitting there now and it's not attached up at the top. And I took two chopsticks. I just had I have a little table up in my bee house and I have things like that in it. I took two little chopsticks and I put them in so that they were kind of bracing the comb in there and it wasn't squished against the next comb. And I just took a pencil and marked dropped and I put the date I forgot all about it and didn't. And because I felt so bad about that hive, don't think I opened it for months again. Months later, I did go and open it, and I had completely forgotten about this. But I saw that they had fixed my mistake.
Wow.
I had just gotten the comb so it was just not touching the one next to it. And what they did was they put new comb along the top and reattached it. It had dropped down a full inch, but they had reattached the comb. And then they went down in the bottom and they took off the bottom inch of it. So they put it back in place. And if I hadn't written that note on the top of the bar about dropped and the date in July, I would never have thought that that had been done. But I was looking at going, oh my God, they completely fixed this with no help from me. And they fixed it in a major way. No one bee or no 10 bees could lift that heavy comb up. It might weigh a pound, and they're tiny little bees, but it weighs more than a pound now that I think of it. But anyway, they fixed it. What I saw was in their service to the whole, there was no emotional charge. There was no, oh, what a screw up, or there was no static charge that came off of it that had the attachment of negative emotions to it. Instead, it felt like when I looked at that comb afterwards, I remember thinking, this is what forgiveness feels like.
Mm.
There's nothing on the other side where the bees have a charge towards me. They just looked at it and they fixed it, and all was forgiven. And I remember that just felt like such a profound lesson. Like, why do I go about my life casting blame and saying, you've done this and you've done it wrong? Or I've done this and I've done it wrong and feel guilty. I mean, why do we have to carry that stuff back and forth to each other? Because I could see clearly it has no relevance to living a good life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So their concept of unity has really embraced me as well. And we feel like I'm not just one of a bunch of people. I'm one of the oneness of all life, of all consciousness.
Mm. What a gift. What a gift.
Yeah.
So how can our listeners know more about you and find you?
My website is spiritbee, spiritbee.com. And my book it's a lovely book. It's not an easy read, like you're going to sit down in one sitting and go all the way through it. It's got a lot of different bee stories and the information that they shared with me. I don't know, maybe I shouldn't say it's not an easy read, but it's a deep read. Mm-hmm. And this is now in English, Dutch, French. It's about to come out in Spanish, and then it will go to German after that, which is wildly crazy for me because I never even fantasized about it. I self-published it, and a few months after it came out, it had done really well with sales. Go figure. I had no idea. And we got picked up by a very good publisher, Sounds True, who probably have books by Sounds True in your library. And that was one of the reasons I went with them, because I already owned a lot of the books they publish. And then it just started going country to country with translations. So it's doing really well. I recommend people, of course, buy the book and have a good read with it. And my second place to be in touch with me is through our nonprofit. 2 years ago, Susan Nylands and I started a nonprofit called Preservation Beekeeping. And for people who are actually keeping bees, you can come on to our Facebook site or our website and interact with us. And we have a lot of different information about, if you're going to be a beekeeper, then here are some suggestions of different ways that we would recommend that you keep bees.
So that's Preservation Beekeeper.
Preservation Beekeeping.
Beekeeping. Okay.
.com.
.com.
Or on Facebook, Preservation Beekeeping.
Love
and you
it.
can also follow me, but if you follow me on Facebook, you will also see all my cat videos as well.
Of course.
Going in my garden and what my dog did and everything else is on.
Because you do more than beekeep. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. I loved hearing your stories. I really encourage individuals to get the book, to consider what's in there. You know, we need to learn from nature instead of trying to tell nature what it is or what it is not. You know, it's maintained an integrity that I'm afraid some has been lost within our human psyche. So we need to get back to us, and we can do that through the oneness of bees. So thank you very much, and we will who knows where we'll meet again, but I think we will. Thank you very much. Bye.